June 12, 1994. Nicole Brown Simpson appears to have it all. Beauty, health, money, and 2 adorable kids. She's living the Hollywood dream.
She was a diamonds and pearls kind of girl, but very spiritual. Always brought a smile on your face.
For 7 years, she was married to football hero O.J. Simpson.
O.J. really did worship her. I mean, really did. But, you know, trophy wife, yes.
But behind that trophy wife image lurked an ugly secret.
I couldn't believe anybody would hit a woman like that. It's just terrible.
Her dream will soon be shattered, and a bizarre freeway chase will lead O.J. Simpson into a courtroom media frenzy. This is the last 24 hours in the life of Nicole Brown Simpson. Los Angeles, California. June 11th, 1994. It's 10:40 p.m. and Nicole Brown Simpson is sleeping at home at 875 South Bundy Drive. For the last year, she's been living here in affluent Brentwood with her children, Sydney and Justin. It's been 2 years since she divorced her husband, football great O.J. Simpson. And in just 24 hours, she'll be dead. The next morning at 6:30, Nicole Brown Simpson is already up. A fitness fanatic, the 35-year-old hits the pavement for an early morning run. It's a ritual familiar to her sister Tanya.
Well, it's the in thing to do in California. You gotta look good, gotta be in shape. But yeah, she was running like 9 miles a day. I don't know how she did it, but yeah, she was in shape.
Meanwhile, less than 10 miles away at the Riviera Country Club, her famous ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, the retired football star and media celebrity, is also getting his early morning exercise. In his case, it's teeing off with his Hollywood cronies. Golf is now his major sporting passion. And tonight, he's set to fly to Chicago to host a celebrity golf tournament for Hertz Rent-A-Car, the company that keeps him in the multi-millionaire bracket. After 7 years of marriage, Nicole Brown Simpson is just getting used to the single life. Someone who knew her well at the time is neighbor Ron Hardy.
I met Nick through some mutual friends, and just a long story short, just ended up moving really about 200 yards in the proximity of where Bundy was, and spent an awful lot of time with her and the kids, and we had very, very mutual friends, and we were always doing things socially. I think that she had discovered independence. She hadn't had, at that point, a whole lot of men that were very nice to her, other than her friends, and she wasn't allowed to really have those, you know, per se. But I really think that she started to come into her own and realize that, you know, she had something to say, and people would listen to what she had to say rather than being told what to say.
Like every divorcee, she just wanted to have fun, you know, and she had fun with her friends, the sisters, we all had fun.
And fun was the driving force behind her very first meeting with O.J. Simpson. Back in 1977, Nicole Brown was working at an upscale Hollywood club when in walked the man she would marry. The meeting was electric.
It was love at first sight with those two. It was just chemistry.
Although O.J. Simpson was a household name, The young, naive Nicole, who knew little about football, had only a sketchy idea of who he actually was. To most of America, the man known as the Juice was both a sports legend and a Hollywood star.
He was part of the scene, and because Hollywood idolizes jocks, the way jocks idolize Hollywood. And so it's not a surprise that O.J. would get connected with the Hollywood crowd.
The Juice returned to the restaurant often, determined to win over the beautiful Nicole. She sought the advice of David LeBon, an old friend with whom she was sharing an apartment.
I can remember her coming home and said, "Oh, there's this football player, he wants to ask me out." And I said, "Oh, what's his name?" He says, O.J. Simpson. I said, "Oh, you're kidding." You know, because I know, you know, he's a famous running back and he's a fantastic football player.
In the game of seduction, Nicole was clearly outmatched. He was 30, she was 18. He was a star, she worked in a restaurant. He was a multimillionaire, she was broke. And O.J.'s persistence paid off.
I think she got home at 2 o'clock, and I said, "You know what, where have you been?" He says, "Oh, we had a great date." And I can remember he picked me up in the black Rolls Royce, and his Rolls said Juice, you know, and that was his nickname. And and then all of a sudden I looked and her pants had been ripped, and I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "Well, he just was a little forceful and he ripped my pants." I said, "You're kidding, why would you let him do that?" I was kind of upset, and I said, "I want to talk to him, I want to, you know." And she goes, "No, I think I like him."
However, from the start, it was no fairy tale. O.J. Simpson outmatched Nicole in one other important way. He was married with 2 children. What's more, his wife, Marguerite, was pregnant with a 3rd. But that didn't stop Nicole. Neither did O.J.'s jealous request that she immediately vacate her male roommate's apartment.
He said to her, "I don't want you living with anybody," even though I was, you know, completely a platonic, a friend and everything. And from there, he got her apartment. He seemed possessive, but not too overwhelming at that time. Later on, he seemed like he was more and more possessive and more jealous.
Jealousy will eventually tear Nicole and O.J. apart. And it will mark O.J. Simpson as the prime suspect in a crime that will unleash a media circus. June 12, 1994, Los Angeles. It's 10:40 a.m. and Nicole Brown Simpson has only 12 hours to live. As usual, her life centers on her kids.
She would do anything and everything for those 2 kids. And she was a kid herself.
She spends the morning buying them toys. At a florist's, she buys a bouquet to brighten up the house. She also picks some yellow roses for her daughter Sydney, who, this evening, is performing at her school's dance recital. The healthy alimony payment she receives from O.J. Simpson allow her to live the life of the rich and famous, like the rest of her neighbors in posh Brentwood, California. Shopping sprees and Ferraris, however, are a long way from Nicole's modest roots. The second of 4 daughters, she was born in 1959, not in America, but in Frankfurt, Germany, to Lou Brown, an American serviceman, and Juditha Bauer, his German wife. In 1963, when Nicole was 4, the family moved to California, to the booming shores of Orange County.
She was a little surf rat. We grew up on the beach, and she had her own little surfboard, and we have great surfing where we grew up.
Nicole and Denise were closest in age, And in high school, the two sisters were the picture-perfect image of the beautiful California girl.
People were captivated by these two, and yeah, they were both homecoming princesses, and everybody knew Nicole and Denise.
Nicole, the homecoming princess, attended Dana Hills High School, and in 1976, she was thinking about a career. One of her teachers was Bill Prestridge.
Well, it was in my journalism class, and we were all talking about what kids wanted to do for careers. And it came to Nicole, and I can remember this because Nicole said to the class that she wanted to marry somebody wealthy. And the whole class kind of froze, and we kind of looked at each other, and I said, well, Nicole, that's not really a job.
She was going to Dana Hills High School when I met her, and I would come down probably every other weekend so I could photograph her because I needed to do school projects for photography school. And her and Denise, we would do pictures, and they were the most beautiful women that, you had ever seen. I mean, they were just stunning.
She also showed flashes of creative talent behind the camera and impressed her old friend David LeBon.
After high school, she wanted to be a photographer like myself. So I would teach her the camera and a lot of things about, and show her the f-stops and show her the shutter speeds and teach her all about the camera. I said, well, why don't you think about going to photography school?
She was a fantastic photographer. She always had the best camera. She always knew, where the best light was, and she was just very savvy at it.
But instead of moving 100 miles north to take the photography course, Nicole followed David LeBon to Los Angeles in search of a job and moved in with him to split the expenses.
It was completely platonic. I remember it was a studio apartment. That's all I could afford. And she would sleep on the bed, and I slept on the floor with, I can remember I had a sleeping bag.
Her dazzling good looks trumped any other talent she may have had and led to a job as a hostess at the Daisy, an upscale Beverly Hills club, where she greeted the stars and would meet O.J. Simpson.
The Daisy was a private club and a movie star hangout, and everybody who was everybody would go there.
When the Juice first set eyes on the new hostess at the Daisy, he was a household name. But his football career was almost over. And so was his marriage to Marguerite.
I was having problems in my marriage. And I was married to a very good person, but you would think we had healthy kids, you would think we had money, you would think fame, that how could there be problems? But unfortunately, money and fame is no cure-all for, I guess, personal understanding.
After a 3-year affair with Nicole, O.J. Simpson finally divorced his first wife. In February 1985, he married the homecoming princess in a ceremony at his Rockingham mansion.
We were invited, and it was great. I took pictures. I took tons and tons of pictures of the wedding, and it was just fabulous.
What a blast. It was a great time. When you go to a wedding and everybody, it's a great party.
They set up house at the Rockingham mansion, and by 1988, they had 2 children, a girl, Sydney, and a boy, Justin. They were the very image of wedded bliss. O.J., the football legend, loved to be seen with sexy Nicole on his arm. For her part, Nicole was living the Hollywood dream, and she took to it like a duck to water.
The thing she liked about it was the going to charity functions, meeting a lot of these stars that they'd run into and all the people with money. She didn't turn out to be one of these celebrity wives that would just go out and really want to be in the limelight. She was not that type of girl.
Sure, she did the Hollywood glam scene, but really, you would never see Nicole without her flip-flops. She was always in shorts. She was I call her an elegant, glamorous hippie chick. She was a diamonds and pearls kind of girl, but very spiritual. Always brought a smile on your face. You were down, she was there to lift you up.
By 1988, she had a $5 million mansion surrounded by the cream of Hollywood. She had a condo in New York, a $2 million seafront house at Laguna Beach.
No, it was a beach house. Sure, it was nice furniture and stuff, but it was just kids, beach, sand, chewing gum, bathing suits, shorts, flip-flops, you know, just that's who she was.
And, of course, his and her Ferraris.
She had this Ferrari. It was a beach car. We would take it down to the beach. So it's not that she disrespected things, but she just didn't care.
And the good life was punctuated by endless vacations, often with her sisters in tow.
Oh gosh, we would go skiing. We went to Hawaii together. I would take care of the kids sometimes, and we'd go to New York together. It was just, there were happy times. It wasn't all bad. Just like a lot of the victims, it's not always all bad. And just unfortunately, when it was bad, it was bad.
Behind the cars, the vacations, and the luxurious properties lay a fatal flaw in Nicole's seemingly perfect marriage: O.J.'s volatile temper. Tormented by jealousy, the football legend frequently flew into rages. But Nicole was feisty and stood her ground.
Nicole was interesting. She could just push his buttons, and actually he could go off. Unfortunately, if I would have known more about it today, I mean, looking back at it, you know, I would have changed some things if I could. You know, it's really... O.J. is a very, very, very controlling person. It was always about O.J. It was always O.J. this, O.J. that. I mean, that's just how he was.
Not knowing what to do, Nicole turned to therapist Dr. Susan Forward.
Nicole was a very complex woman. The situation was a very complex situation. When you're married to a superstar who's making tons of money, and there's a glamorous lifestyle, the benefits were such that she didn't see the reason to leave. They always hope it's going to get better.
I didn't see anything bad. All I saw was the good, because victims of domestic violence, they keep it very quiet. You know, they don't tell anybody what's going on. So when this whole thing happened, yeah, I was in disbelief. And I didn't even know what this domestic violence stuff was until this happened.
Long before they were married, Nicole was jolted by the violence of O.J.'s dark side. During an argument, he smashed the windshield of their Mercedes.
Being a football player, I think there was probably still some violence in him.
There is a huge amount of domestic violence with professional athletes, huge, especially football players, because they live in a violent world, and they are besieged by women. They get the idea that they're really hot stuff, and they can do anything they want to do.
He did have a collection of knives, and when he found out that was one of her fears, he would use that against her. My wife told me that Nicole talked about being worried, concerned that O.J. said that he was going to slice her up.
The ongoing fights escalated, and Nicole was so afraid that she called the police. Very soon, they'll be called for the last time to investigate a brutal double murder. June 12, 1994, 11:30 a.m., Los Angeles. Nicole Brown Simpson has spent the morning shopping for her kids. She's bought a dozen yellow roses for her daughter Sydney, who tonight will be performing at a recital. It will be the last time she will see her 8-year-old daughter dance. In 11 hours, Nicole Brown Simpson will be dead. Less than 10 miles away, after his round of golf, her ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, plays a leisurely game of gin rummy at his country club with his Hollywood friends. Later, Simpson would say that he was killing time before attending Sydney's dance rehearsal and then catching a flight to Chicago. It's a long way from brawling in San Francisco's housing projects where Simpson was born in 1947. Orenthal James Simpson hated his name. Even as a child, he was known as OJ, or, inevitably, the Juice, a name that stuck with him throughout his football years. His family was poor, and because of a lack of vitamins in his diet, young OJ suffered from rickets, which, ironically, forced the future all-star running back to wear a corrective leg brace in his childhood years. As a teen, he often got into street fights and did time in a juvenile detention center. But young OJ was determined to become a somebody.
One of the things I wanted most as a kid growing up in the ghetto was not money, it was fame. I wanted to be known. I wanted people to say, hey, there goes, OJ.
Right from the starting line, he got what he wanted because of a single raw talent.
He could run like mad. He ran at USC, he ran on a world record 400-meter relay team. That's how fast he was. Oh, I met him basically the mid-1960s when he played for City College of San Francisco, and where he started getting his rave notices. And then after he came down to USC, you give him the ball and he'd get 2 yards, you get 2 yards, you get 4 yards, then he'd get 45 yards. He was amazing. He was just a great, great running back.
By 1969, the 22-year-old Simpson was the #1 NFL draft pick and signed with the Buffalo Bills for $350,000, a huge sum at the time. He cracked one record after another. The most rushing yards gained in a season, the most rushing yards in a single game, most touchdowns in a season. But OJ also had a second gift. He could charm the devil. And that charm led to work in front of the camera and plunged OJ into the strange world of celebrity. And the poor boy from San Francisco couldn't get enough.
There isn't a great athlete who's not egotistical. You have to be.
So egotistical, in fact, that he was driven to win even the friendliest of games.
I think he probably fudged on his card a little bit. But I wasn't the greatest golfer in the world, and I didn't fudge. He would always have to win at Monopoly. Just anything. He had to win, no matter what it was. He was the winner. And it was whenever we went out somewhere, it had to be about OJ.
And that's the way these people think. I'm special. And from the time great athletes, are about 7 or 8 years old, people kiss their behind because everybody wants to be associated with a winner. And so the little peccadillos start getting larger. And the kid has learned, I can get away with anything. So why shouldn't he think that way when he gets older?
For Simpson, getting away with it became a way of life. Not just at play with his pals, but also at home. In the early hours of New Year's Day 1989, his 4-year marriage to Nicole hit a new and violent low. Answering yet another domestic disturbance call, police arrived at OJ's mansion. They rang the buzzer outside the gate, but the housekeeper refused to let them in. Meanwhile, Nicole ran out of the bushes half-dressed, yelling at the cops that Simpson was trying to kill her.
I'm in the business of changing people, and I do a pretty good job of it. But I'll tell you, any batterer, they have a Swiss cheese conscience, with great big holes in it. And as a result, there is no moral compass.
I remember I actually heard on the news about him being arrested and her having him arrested at the house. And I just was so upset. And I think that's really the first time that I knew that, you got to watch out. I mean, he's an abusive husband, and
O.J. Simpson was charged with assaulting Nicole and pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor. He was ordered to take psychological counseling.
Oh, that was a joke. Some friend of theirs did some sessions on the telephone with him, and I think it may have been all of 2 or 3.
With every police call, O.J. Simpson was leaving a wide trail of circumstantial evidence, all pointing to a man who was unpredictable and violent. The pattern was always the same. Nicole would always forgive him, and O.J. would always do it again.
The cycle is very traditional. There's a period of calm. The woman thinks maybe he's changed. Something happens. She says something. She does something. He doesn't like it. It doesn't take much to trigger the rage. And the next thing, he's acting out the rage with the beatings. Then he does what I call a phony remorse. I love you. Don't leave me. I can't live without you. It'll never happen again, I swear. And she believes him. And then it starts all over again.
But finally, in 1992, after 7 years of marriage, Nicole had had enough and divorced O.J. Simpson.
It was New Year's Eve, 1992, and we were at Spago's, and she said, come on, let's go to the bathroom. And I said, all right. She said, I'm asking for a divorce tonight.
But that didn't end the violence. On October 25th, 1993, less than a year before her death, O.J.'s rage was finally caught on tape when Nicole called 911.
He threatening you? I'm going nuts. Okay, just stay on the line. I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the... Wait a minute, wait. Just stay on the line so we can know what's going on till the police get there, okay?
Just 5 days before Nicole's murder, a worker at a women's shelter received a call from a woman who gave only the name of Nicole. She reported that the woman was in dire fear for her life. Still victim to the cycle of abuse, Nicole kept seeing O.J. Simpson even after the divorce. But now, wise to the legal system, she was storing pictures of her cuts and bruises in a safety deposit box.
Denise would take pictures of her face and her bruises so they could have proof of the abuse, so she could get have the children, because she was worried about her children. And if you ever saw those pictures, it was terrible. I mean, he really, I was so upset at that. I just, I couldn't believe anybody would hit a woman like that. It's just terrible.
June 12th, 1994. At exactly 2:18 p.m., O.J. Simpson calls his ex-wife from his country club. A waitress working at the club would report that O.J. was engaged in a shouting match on the telephone. In just over 8 hours, Nicole will be killed. This phone call, along with others made on that day by O.J., Nicole and her family, will help establish a timeline that will become increasingly important in the double murder investigation that's yet to come. June 12th, 1994, 4:40 p.m. Paul Revere High School in Brentwood, California. Nicole Brown Simpson sits with her mother, Juditha, and her 2 sisters, Dominique and Denise. Nicole has only 6 hours to live. O.J. Simpson arrives soon after and sits behind the Brown family. Nicole pointedly ignores him, and with good reason. In In the last few days, her ex-husband has threatened to report her to the IRS for not disclosing the sale of a property. It would force Nicole to move out of her present house to avoid a large tax payment. Two years earlier, after being granted a divorce from OJ, Nicole had truly thought she could start her life anew, free from OJ's interference. In January 1992, she moved out to a rented house. She was later awarded a cash settlement of almost $500,000, as well as $10,000 a month for child support. She also kept the Ferrari.
I think that there was a growing period. She started sort of putting things together a little bit more. I mean, she realized that, you know, the lifestyle that she'd had and the, you know, the privilege that was there was not, I don't think, as important to her as it once was. But there's still the reality of, okay, what am I going to do? And, you know, she made time for herself, but it was never at the expense of the children.
Nicole hadn't been truly single since she was 18. Now, no longer the trophy wife, she was discovering a whole new life with the opposite sex.
I don't even remember her ever going, I'm going on a date. I mean, she spent time with guys. I mean, she was fascinated by, like I said before, men that were nice to her and that would, you know, ask her a question and wait for her to finish the sentence. Yeah, she flirted and she you know, goofed around just like the rest of us because she hadn't done that in a very, very long time.
Even though O.J. Simpson had found a new life and a new girlfriend, he wasn't happy with the way Nicole was living her new life.
When she did want to date somebody, and he found out, I think he was, you know, he was probably pretty upset about it.
By the time of the dance recital, Nicole's anger is red hot because of O.J.'s threat to report her to the IRS. She refuses to acknowledge he's even there.
He was rejected at the daughter's dance recital. You can't reject an obsessor. They just, that's when whatever demons they have really kick in.
Later, at 6:40 p.m., following Sydney's dance recital, Nicole and her family celebrate at the Mezzaluna restaurant, where she's a regular.
Mezzaluna was a neighborhood Italian restaurant, very casual.
25-year-old waiter Ron Goldman greets and chats with Nicole and her family. They're casual friends. But in just 4 hours, the handsome, aspiring actor will become the second victim of a brutal double homicide. Waitress Tia Gavin was also working the tables that night.
Ron Goldman and I discussed, we looked at the reservation book, which you do, to see what to expect and what to get ready for. And he said, oh, I know these people. I'd rather not wait on them because I know them. And it's not fun to wait on people you know. And so I was more than pleased to take a nice big table like that.
Nicole orders spinach and cheese rigatoni and a bottle of good Chianti. The meal is festive. But 4 hours before her death, Nicole makes a startling confession about O.J. Simpson to her mother.
You know, the night that she died, my mom said, she leaned over to me and said, he will always be my soulmate. After everything that she had endured, he will always be my soulmate. So, yeah. So it was, they had something.
And that something was co-obsession.
Not just one person is obsessed, but the other person is as well. And there's a rejection and a coming back together, and a rejection and a coming back together. And I think that that's probably what was going on here.
At around 8:40 p.m., Nicole pays the check. She has just 2 hours left to live.
I think they all pretty much got up and left around the same time. They might have been saying goodbye to each other outside the front door as, the one family went off in one direction.
Detective Tom Lang headed the homicide investigation and would later piece together the chain of events.
After dinner, they strolled across the street. Nicole's mother and father, Lou and Juditha, left the restaurant and got into their car and drove away. Unbeknownst to Juditha at the time, she dropped her glasses in the gutter.
After leaving the Mezzaluna restaurant, Nicole, Justin, Sydney, and Sydney's friend go for ice cream. They then head back to Nicole's townhouse, where Sydney's friend is picked up by her mother and goes home. For the kids, it's the end of a wonderful day. At the same time, O.J. Simpson and actor Kato Kaelin, who lives rent-free in Simpson's guest house, take Simpson's Bentley to pick up some food. The ex-football star orders a burger, and Kaelin opts for the chicken sandwich with fries. They drive back to Simpson's Rockingham house with O.J. munching the burger and Kaelin saving his meal to eat at home. Half an hour later, Nicole receives a call from a friend who's 3 days into drug rehab. She puts the kids to bed and receives another phone call, this time from her mother.
Phone records show 9:42 p.m. Juditha called Nicole and said, "Hey, I think I lost my glasses at the restaurant. Could you see if you could get them back?"
The prosecution would later claim that this tiniest of accidents would lead waiter Ron Goldman to his murder. June 12, 1994, Los Angeles, California. It's roughly 10 p.m. Earlier, Nicole Brown Simpson's mother, Juditha, had accidentally dropped her glasses as she left a restaurant with her family. Nicole phones the Mezzaluna, where waiter Ron Goldman tells her they've been found.
Ron said, you know, I'm friends with Nicole. I know where she lives. I can drop them off at her house when I go home. My understanding was that they were casual friends. I'm sure I wouldn't be at least bit surprised if he would have wanted it to be more. But the general feeling from those who knew him was that it had not been more than friendship.
In less than 1 hour, both will be found dead.
Just all the events that led up to what happened were absolutely 100% harmless, no matter what stories were spun. I mean, he was just being a good guy.
At the same time, at 10:03 p.m., Simpson is busy trying to reach his girlfriend, but there's no answer, and he leaves no message. Meanwhile, in her home on South Bundy Drive, Nicole runs the bath, lights candles, and creates a relaxing atmosphere. For his part, Ron Goldman is wrapping things up at the Mezzaluna.
He spoke with the bartender a little bit and then eventually left before I did, because I was the closing waiter of the night.
Goldman heads home to change out of his waiter's uniform. He borrows a friend's car and drives to Nicole's with her mother's glasses.
The front door of the residence was wide open. The light was on, the porch light was on. Nicole was not wearing any shoes, so she was no doubt expecting him to show up there with the glasses.
But something went terribly wrong. Although records show that at 10:30 p.m., a man and woman walk past Nicole's townhouse and see nothing strange, only 10 minutes later, all hell breaks loose.
The evidence gives us 2 or 3 scenarios. He may have confronted Goldman. Goldman may have become confrontational with him. You know, what are you doing? We don't know, okay? We just know that a witness heard somebody yelling around the time that this occurred from an alley across the street, about 250 feet east of there.
Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson are brutally attacked by an unknown killer, or killers. The two victims are left dead in a pool of blood outside the house, carved up with a knife. The bodies are covered in stab wounds. Nicole's head is barely left attached. 20 minutes earlier, at 10:20 p.m., a limo had pulled up at Simpson's Rockingham home to take him to the airport and his business trip to Chicago. But the driver couldn't reach anyone on the intercom. While waiting, he saw a man walking across the property in the dark, heading for the house.
He says, oh, it looks like him now. I think I'll try it again. So he calls, and Simpson answers, yeah, I'm rushing around. I'll be down there in a few minutes. He comes down, closer to 11. They're running a little late. They're grabbing up bags. There's a small half-moon-shaped flight bag in the driveway. Cato says, here, let me get this for you. He says, no, don't touch that. You know, I don't want you, I'll take care of that. He says, okay. So they get about 5 pieces of luggage, they put it in a limo, and they take off.
Now, more than an hour later, with O.J. Simpson boarding a flight for Chicago, a mysterious trail of bloody footprints will lead to the scene of the murder. June 12, 1994, 11:45 p.m. Nicole Brown Simpson's neighbors come across a gruesome sight. Nicole's frantic Akita dog loose on the street, its feet covered in blood. The dog eventually leads the neighbors to the hacked-up bodies of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, already dead for more than an hour.
I received a call at something before 3 a.m. at home from my lieutenant, John Rogers, that they had a double, indicating a double homicide in the West LA area, and that was it. When I got there, the area was secured. In fact, all of Bundy Drive was blocked off and secured. We were given a brief walkthrough, shown the evidence, the blood was pointed out, the evidence was pointed out. This is a rage killing. These people weren't robbed. This isn't a dope hit. They're slashed and cut and one decapitated nearly.
The next morning, I was in my classes at UCLA, and during a break, I got a phone call from the manager of the restaurant saying that Ron hadn't shown up to work that morning. Half an hour after that, somebody I know called and said, have you seen the news? Nicole Brown Simpson has been murdered, you know, in Brentwood with somebody else, with a guy. I thought, oh my God, Ron's been murdered. Yeah.
I walked out my door and I could hear the commotion. I got there probably maybe half an hour after they'd taken their bodies away, and I was obviously visibly shaken.
Gosh, I was in my studio in Culver City, and I got this call, and I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a dream, and it was just the most devastating thing in the world for me. I mean, to hear, I cried, and it was just devastating.
The following morning, O.J. Simpson was contacted in Chicago and returned on the next available flight.
There was a wake. I didn't go to that. And then on Thursday, it was her, you know, it was time to to see her off, and it was very difficult. It was very difficult. At one point, O.J. kind of came up and shook my hand and thanked me for being her friend, but it was very surreal to me because I started putting together what possibly the scenario could have been, and it was very awkward and uncomfortable.
And then the news was out. Simpson was charged with the double murder. In a bizarre attempt to avoid arrest, O.J. Simpson took off with his friend, A.C. Cowling, in his white Bronco, and the slow, iconic chase began on the California freeway. Simpson held a gun to his own head while the police, on a cell phone, convinced him to turn himself in. The 9-month trial aired everyone's dirty laundry. The Juice was exposed as a vicious wife-beater. The LA Police Department, in turn, was accused by the defense of being racist and sloppy. In the end, the prosecution could not convince the jury that there was no reasonable doubt, and O.J. Simpson walked out a free man. However, the Browns and the Goldmans filed a civil suit against O.J. Simpson and won. He is yet to pay the $33 million in damages. The memory of Nicole Brown Simpson is forever preserved through a foundation dedicated to stopping the cycle of spousal abuse.
She wasn't the battered woman that everybody knows about her. She was alive and fun and funny. Oh my gosh, she was so funny.
I mean, she's just the sweetest gal, and that's why it's so hard now, because I really miss her.
Just vibrant and funny and beautiful and not aware of her beauty that way. I mean, there wasn't a conceited bone in her body.
Yeah, I miss the living daylights out of her. I miss that phone call. I miss her voice. It's sad. But, you know, I cry because, yeah, I miss her.
April 18th, 1993. David Koresh is the most notorious religious leader in the United States.
When Christ reveals himself, it's going to be according to the book.
To his followers, he's a modern-day Messiah.
He gave me every reason to keep believing.
Many feel he's been hand-picked by God.
If he said the sky is green, they were going to believe it.
I think David Koresh 100% believed that he was a prophet.
But to the authorities, he's a dangerous criminal.
This guy is a liar and a fraud, and he took sexual advantage of children.
He said it was his duty to have 21 children by virgins.
And soon he will leave them and the rest of his flock to their very own Armageddon.
We had no idea what we were in for.
This is the last 24 hours in the life of David Koresh. Waco, Texas, April 18th, 1993, 12:30 p.m. David Koresh, the leader of a doomsday cult known as the Branch Davidians, is barricaded in a religious center 100 miles south of Dallas. He's been seriously wounded in a shootout with law enforcement. And in just 24 hours, he'll be dead. Outside, more than 700 armed federal agents have surrounded the area.
You saw multiple law enforcement agencies, emergency equipment, federal agencies, buses, SWAT teams, civilians. It had every element of humanity and law enforcement that you could possibly see.
Koresh and 83 of his most loyal followers, including 21 children, have been holed up here at their Mount Carmel compound for the last 50 days.
We expected that one by one we'd eventually all come out. We were kind of waiting on God through, to convey through David as to what we were to do.
I was very encouraged to continue on because he gave me every reason to keep believing.
Employing more than 40 negotiators, the FBI work around the clock to persuade Koresh and his followers to surrender. Leading those negotiations is Byron Sage.
David was a master of deception and a master of delay. I guess he felt the longer he delayed, the more exposure he had on the world stage. I mean, think about it. By this time, he had been on the front page of nearly every news magazine in the United States.
And for the FBI, the intense media scrutiny only adds to the pressure.
The average amount of time of a hostage barricade situation in the United States is about 6 to 8 hours. Hours. The whole thing was just totally unprecedented.
Authorities view Koresh as a glorified con man who's brainwashed his followers. One of those who followed him was Dana Okamoto.
He was really good at talking around things and using semantics to get you off track and into where he wanted to go.
Negotiating with the Davidians is not like negotiating with the local dope dealer or cop killer, because David and the other people in charge want to talk about the Bible. And the FBI is not trained to talk about the Bible.
David Koresh believes that this standoff with authorities was prophesied long ago in the Bible.
David's predecessors, and David too, believed that the army of Babylon, believed to be an army of unbelievers, would attack them.
Now, the so-called army of Babylon prepares to break the stalemate and, according to Koresh, is about to set off an apocalyptic prophecy. A prophecy that David Koresh has been preaching for the last 8 years as the leader of the Branch Davidian cult. An offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists, the Davidians' whole belief system centers on the literal interpretation of the book of Revelation. And no one could interpret the word of God quite like Koresh.
He understood what to tell us, how to explain it to us. We felt very close to God when David was teaching us.
The way we've been brought up, the way we've been taught for years, was that if somebody had a message from God, that kind of made them a prophet.
The group that was around David would believe anything he said. If he said the sky is green, they were going to believe it.
Using the Bible, Koresh rationalized the use of force to defend the faith.
And he quite often cited the scripture in which Jesus tells his followers on the eve of his own arrest, sell your cloak and buy a sword, which in today's terminology would be buy an M16 or an AK-47.
David Koresh's interest in weapons would eventually lead to his downfall.
David Koresh and the people at Mount Carmel began to attract the attention of the ATF when a shipment of grenades they had ordered, hollowed out grenades, meaning inert grenades, when a shipment of these broke open and a UPS delivery man saw them, he called the local authorities.
Given the group's radical beliefs, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, placed Mount Carmel under surveillance. And on February 28, 1993, they organized a secret raid on the compound to arrest Koresh. But he was informed by a follower that the authorities were on their way. Clive Doyle was at Koresh's side.
He'd heard somebody was coming. Just what to expect, I don't know what he was expecting, but he went to the front door.
A master manipulator, Koresh believed he could talk his way out of the jam. Former Davidian David Thibodeau remembers the cult leader's words.
He says, now everyone, they're coming, they're on their way. Don't anyone do anything stupid. I want to talk to them. We're going to try to work this out.
It's a matter of dispute as to who fired the first shot.
And then just all hell broke loose. And it just seemed at that point that shots were coming from all around the building.
With 21 children inside, one of the Davidians made a desperate 911 call.
911, what's your emergency? There's children and women in here to call it off.
But for more than 2 hours, both sides continued shooting. 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were killed. More than 20 other agents were wounded before a ceasefire was finally negotiated. For authorities, the raid was a full-blown disaster.
What the ATF did not understand was that the people at Mount Carmel, when they looked out their windows, said, oh, here is the army of Babylon come to destroy our faith. We must defend our faith.
I remember being amazed at how many people had come to take us down, if you will. I saw a couple of their faces, and they actually looked just stunned that they were walking away from the situation.
With federal agents murdered by the Davidians, the FBI took charge. In the skirmish, David Koresh was seriously wounded, shot in the hip and wrist.
I think he thought he was going to die.
Koresh called his mother, got a recording.
Mama, they shot me and I'm dying, all right? But I'll be back real soon, okay? And I'll see y'all in the skies. Bye.
His mother, Bonnie Haldeman, later tried to call him back.
Of course, I picked the phone up and started trying to call back, and I couldn't get anybody. So I guess it wasn't meant to be for me to talk to him.
And she never would again. And now, 50 days later, the botched ATF raid has not only left Koresh dangerously wounded, but also led to the longest siege in modern American history. A siege that will soon end in catastrophe. Waco, Texas, April 19th, 1993. It's 2 a.m. and David Koresh has less than 11 hours left to live. For the past 50 days, Koresh's cult, the Branch Davidians, have been locked in a bitter standoff with authorities who are preparing to finally force him from his sanctuary. However, Koresh has no intention of giving up just yet. Despite being wounded in an earlier firefight, he's writing his interpretation of one of the Bible's most contested passages in the book of Revelation.
The book of Revelation says that only the Lamb, who is a holy figure, can unlock the 7 seals. Koresh's claim to fame was that he was the Lamb, and he and only he could explain those passages that refer to the 7 seals.
One of the lead FBI negotiators is Clint Van Zandt.
The great carrot that David Koresh held out to the FBI and federal government was that when I finish my interpretation of the 7 seals, and I'm into it, when I finish this interpretation, then we're all going to come out.
His interpretation was that it was a big build-up to the final days, and how God would reveal himself to the world, and his kingdom would be set up on the earth, and that the group of people he was talking to, us, we were the people who would help deliver that message to the world.
But the FBI are not interested in debating religious prophecies. Throughout the siege, the FBI have employed extreme psychological tactics in an attempt to flush out David Koresh and his followers. Agents have cut off the electricity and bombard the compound with sound.
The FBI officials had some Tibetan chants on a tape that was being played over a loud speaker system, blasting it into the Branch Davidian compound.
And then they started playing the sounds of rabbits being slaughtered, Nancy Sinatra, These Boots Are Made for Walking.
They had sirens, they had jets, they had breaking glass and things, sounds that were being played in. And again, it was kind of psychological operations. It's like, let's keep them up, just like we're being kept up. Let's stress them out like we're being stressed out. So mutually, we'll come together and say, hey, we're all tired of this.
But despite his wounds, Koresh remains defiant. He records a video message and sends it out to the FBI.
And bringing these tanks and stuff around here, I tell you what, being an American first, I'm the kind of guy that I'll stand in front of a tank, you can run over me, but I'll be biting one of the tracks. No one's going to hurt me or my family.
So it was just basically a moral question. We had to make a stand for what we believed.
David Koresh believes that he has the right to oppose the forces surrounding him. But he has no idea that in a few hours the FBI are planning to hit the compound with tear gas to drive him from Mount Carmel, his home for the last 9 years. Koresh's first home was in Houston, Texas, where back on August 17th, 1959, he was born Vernon Wayne Howell to Bonnie Sue Clark, a teenaged high school student.
I was very much in love with David's father, but my daddy wouldn't allow us to get married. He was 19, I was 15.
Bonnie's boyfriend barely got a chance to meet his tiny newborn son, and soon enough, the teenage romance was over.
He saw him a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, and then after he was 4, Vernon was 4, I moved away to the Dallas area from Houston.
Desperate for stability, she jumped into a marriage with another man who began to take his violent temper out on the young boy.
There was a couple times that he whipped him sort of hard, left bruises on his behind. It was about 2 years we were together. It didn't work out.
Now out of options, 18-year-old Bonnie dropped off her son at his grandparents' and promptly left town to find work.
I don't know what I'd done without my mother. She was a big help to me because I was searching for myself.
Young David was 5 before he lived with his mother again. By then, Bonnie had remarried, and the boy was faced with yet another father figure. And if home life had been a trial for David, so was school.
They started evaluating David because he was having problems with certain areas in school, even though he had a high IQ and was very smart. So they sent him to special classes.
Plagued with learning difficulties, the young boy soon earned the nickname Mr. Retardo.
And I said, well, you know you're not retarded, so just don't pay any attention to him.
A failure at school, David found comfort in music and fell in love with the guitar.
David wanted to be a rock star. That was his goal, and he sure could play loud enough to be a rock star.
Next, young David discovered the Holy Bible. Like the rest of his family, he'd been raised in the ways of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, whose members believe in the second coming of Christ.
He really took an interest in learning the scriptures and taking them to heart and studying and wanting to know why things happened and why God did this and that. And he was really interested, and especially in the Old Testament.
What appealed most to David was the power of the Bible. When he prayed, he began to believe that God was actually speaking directly to him. David David soon discovered evangelical preachers who also claimed God was speaking to them.
And I had bought him a nice big radio, and he would listen to the radio preachers.
Armed with the mighty word of God, the preacher was a powerful figure. He could wield strong influence on his followers, which was appealing to a young and impressionable David Koresh. And now, some 20 years later, as he struggles to complete his manuscript in the besieged compound, the leader of the Branch Davidians is about to lead his adoring flock into infamy. Waco, Texas, April 19th, 1993, 5:59 a.m. In the Mount Carmel Center, a wounded David Koresh is slowly waking up. He has less than 7 hours left to live. Outside the compound, after 51 days, fed up with Koresh's stalling tactics, government agents decide to move things along by unleashing a tear gas attack. FBI head negotiator Byron Sage informs the Davidians of their plan.
And I put the call in about 6 o'clock in the morning, warning them that we were prepared to introduce tear gas.
They started to play on the speaker systems that the siege is over. We're going to be inserting tear gas into the building. And you're all under arrest, come on out with your hands up. And they just kept saying that over and over.
The tear gas plan was actually two plans. At the low end of potential violence is the introduction of CS tear gas. That was plan A, but if they opened fire on us with deadly force, then we would go immediately to plan B. And plan B was to saturate that compound, every room, as rapidly as we could.
But with 21 young children locked inside, using tear gas is a dangerous proposition.
And I remember going to bed the night before, knowing that that next morning gas was going to be inserted. I didn't sleep that night.
Just after 6 a.m., the gassing begins.
It was put in through this long probe-type device on the front of this tank retriever, as well as it was fired in canisters.
The Davidians have a supply of gas masks.
I remember getting my gas mask, putting it on, feeling rather scared at that time.
I remember hearing a sound of breaking glass and the popping sounds all over, like around the building. And you'd hear the gas spray somewhere.
But gas masks are not made for children. They will be the most vulnerable during the attack.
We banked on the fact that the parents, through a natural parental instinct, once that tear gas started to be inserted into that location, would move heaven and earth to get their kids out of there. I would, but we were wrong.
Although bedridden for much of the siege as a result of his gunshot wound, on this day Koresh is up and about, organizing the defense of Mount Carmel.
David Koresh ordered the women and children to take shelter in the concrete room, which was a walk-in cooler, and was called the bunker by the FBI. That was the safest place in the building.
For Koresh, the children are the cult's most precious possession. 12 are his, fathered with his various wives. Like his own parents, Koresh had his first child when he was just a teenager, long before getting involved with the Davidian cult.
When David was around 19, he met his first love. Her name was Linda. She was around, I think, 14 or 15. Beautiful, beautiful, blonde-headed girl. I didn't realize that they were actually having sex together, but anyway, she comes up pregnant. Her dad refused to let David see her anymore. Losing Linda had a very big impact on David's life because I know he loved her very well.
Cut off from Linda and his child, the 20-year-old was suddenly adrift, looking for his place in the world. In 1981, he washed up on the doorstep of Mount Carmel and the Living Waters branch of the Seventh-day Adventists.
The Davidian sect has existed since the 30s as a breakaway group from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the Davidians have long believed when Jesus will return, the world will be destroyed.
I look at the Branch Davidians as a whole separate country. They speak a whole separate language. They have a whole different belief system from what mainstream America has.
There was nothing about David, either at his first visit or subsequent visits, that indicated he was anything special. He was just, you might say, a new convert.
But Koresh caught the eye of the then leader of the Davidians, 67-year-old Lois Roden. And she was so impressed with the young man's interpretation of the Bible that she took him under her wing.
One morning, she got up and says David Koresh had been coming and studying with her at night in her house and had been showing her things.
And she urged the others to start listening to him because she thought he had a unique message or new light to bring onto the scriptures they were studying.
Revelation of John, the apostle.
Soon, others began to see Koresh in a new way. Hailed as a prophet, he seemed to have a gift when it came to interpreting the Word of God.
My first thought when he walked in the door was, so, the prophet of God is a hippie. The whole package was, oh my God. And that was my first impression of the prophet of God. But once he sat down and started to speak, everything changed for me. Because I felt the presence of God in the room.
He could recite whole passages, paragraphs and paragraphs from the Bible without looking at any source.
David Koresh made a whole lot more sense than other people. And I was very impressed by what he was able to put together and explain in the Bible.
He had gotten the group to the point where he didn't have to speak from the Bible anymore. He could just speak as if from God. God's lips to your ears.
What man thought possible?
But Koresh's work didn't end at the pulpit. He was soon sharing the bed of the center's matriarch, Lois Roden.
Which was quite shocking to most people, if only because of the better than 20-year difference in their ages.
Koresh moved to the other extreme when he next married 14-year-old Rachel Jones, daughter of a highly influential Davidian family.
If you believe God's condoning it or ordering it, you tend to accept it.
His marriage also strengthened his position as the cult's leader in waiting. But Lois Roden's son George also had his eyes on the leadership prize.
George was very upset because George saw himself as the heir apparent to the group because he was Lois Roden's son. So he felt he should be the leader.
Against the Lord and against his anointed.
In 1984, 3 years after David arrived at Mount Carmel, the power struggle between David Koresh and George Roden finally came to a head. And Koresh and his sympathizers were kicked out of Mount Carmel.
George Roden was a menacing person, and David took his followers out of Mount Carmel because he wanted to avoid fireworks.
After finally finding his purpose and his voice, David Koresh was being silenced. But now, 9 years later, as the standoff with the FBI comes to a head, David Koresh prepares to make his final statement, one that will be heard around the world. April 19th, 1993, 9 a.m. For the last 51 days, holed up in his Waco, Texas compound, wounded Branch Davidian leader David Koresh has refused to surrender to authorities. And now he and his followers, including 21 children, are being tear-gassed by the FBI. David Koresh has less than 4 hours to live. In a crowded hallway, Koresh reassures the Davidians and gives his final orders to a select few. For Koresh, the prophecy of the end times has finally arrived, and he's determined to make his final stand. Schoolteacher and fellow Davidian Graham Craddock gets a moment with his spiritual leader.
He was sitting on the floor. I went up to him and I saw a box of grenades by his side. He looked at me and he said, "Do you know how to use one of these?"
Koresh hands him a homemade grenade.
He didn't tell me what to use it for. I didn't really want to take it, mainly because if I put it in my pocket and go off my pocket, I'd end up half maimed.
For the last 3 hours, gas attacks orchestrated by the FBI have failed to flush Koresh or his followers out of their sanctuary. But things are about to get much worse.
And the Branch Davidians began firing their weapons out at the FBI armored vehicle. The tactical team took that as their cue then to advance the clock, to let's put a lot of gas in and let's really drive them out of there.
As the FBI escalates the gas attack, tanks smash their way further into the building.
I watched the tank take the 2 front doors and push them back into the building to where I was, so I had to back up more into the chapel area. I'll never forget what it's like to see a tank coming through the front door of the place that you live. It's devastating.
As the armored vehicles maneuver around the compound, they inadvertently sever Koresh's phone line with the FBI. He is no longer able to communicate with his attackers.
David came down to the chapel area and said, you know, they severed the phone cord, so right now there's no negotiation. We're just going to show them that we're not going to come out, and hopefully they'll get us another phone line.
With the phone line cut, the FBI continues to deliver their message over loudspeakers. Tanks penetrate deep into the building, ripping the structure apart. With the situation growing ever more desperate, Koresh refuses to be driven from his sanctuary. But 9 years earlier, in 1984, David Koresh had been thrown out of his precious Mount Carmel by George Roden, son of the then leader Lois Roden. However, Koresh, determined to hold on to his ministry, took his followers to a pinewood forest 90 miles away in Palestine, Texas.
He dropped me off all by myself out there with an axe and a tomahawk. It says, cut a road into the middle of it was like a pine forest and a lot of underbrush and stuff. He says, I'm going off to get some building supplies and I'll be back. He ended up coming back with some guys and a truckload of lumber, and we built a communal building there that we could all meet in and eat in.
When I arrived, there was the one log cabin in the center, and then there were a bunch of buses that had been hollowed out, and people were living in the buses. There was no plumbing, there was no electricity. I call it the Piney Woods. It's just one of the most picturesque places I've been.
But back at Mount Carmel, which George Roden had renamed Rodenville, things were not going so well. His mother, the group's figurehead, passed away, and George was losing members to Koresh. And so Roden issued Koresh a bizarre challenge. In it, the 2 Davidian leaders would compete to raise a 20-year-old corpse from the dead.
George Roden had dug up Anna Hughes and had her casket sitting above ground, and this came to Koresh's knowledge. And he and his followers said, hey, digging up corpses is illegal, let's get George arrested. They went to the county sheriff, who said, bring me proof that Anna Hughes has been dug up.
Koresh and 8 others set out to get photographic evidence of the corpse and of Rodin's crime. Knowing that the leader of Rodinville was prone to violence, they came armed.
They went to shoot the photo and got in a gunfight with George Rodin, in which no one was killed, but for which David was arrested. None of them were convicted, meaning none of them did time, because their argument was that it was self-defense.
Within a year, George Rodin himself ended up in jail on charges including murder. And Koresh seized the opportunity to reclaim Mount Carmel.
Many shall see it and fear.
Now the undisputed leader of Mount Carmel, Koresh celebrated his return by changing his name.
When Vernon Howe took the name David Koresh, it was as if a person had taken a new name upon baptism.
David styled his new persona from 2 biblical heroes, King David and Koresh, a legendary biblical leader.
You take a new name to say, I am a changed person, I am different, my life will be different.
As he developed his new identity at Mount Carmel, he turned to his love of music, well aware of its seductive powers.
He said, you know, Mama, music is how God is going to bring the kids in, you know, to learn. Music is where it's at.
Things were going well for David Koresh. He was even able to capitalize on his love of music by integrating concerts into his Bible studies.
What began happening over a course of time is it was almost like a tradition where after dinner, they would call the band and we'd play for about an hour or so.
They would start playing his music. Could be 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and we knew that was the time to come down.
People would start coming in, and David would go off into a study that could last anywhere from just a couple of hours to 8 or 9 hours.
In addition to their home at Mount Carmel, the Davidians had a residence in Laverne, California, that became an integral part of David's plan to promote his music career and recruit new members.
After David became the top dog at Mount Carmel, the group bought a house in California, which was used when they were trying to make it in Hollywood and in the music scene. It was their base of operations for the musical ministry in its attempt to Christianize the world through Hollywood.
Koresh was now able to blend both of his childhood fantasies, preacher and rock star. But after 51 days under siege, David Koresh, the self-appointed Lamb of God, watches helplessly as his apocalyptic church falls to pieces. For Koresh and his followers, the end of the world is indeed coming. April 19th, 1993, 10:30 a.m. As the FBI continues to pound the Branch Davidians with tanks and tear gas, David Koresh's situation is growing ever more desperate. The building is starting to collapse around him. He has only 2 hours to live. The armored vehicles are now penetrating deep enough to reach the inner sanctuary. In the FBI camp, agents listen in through electronic bugs, trying to get a picture of what David Koresh and his followers are doing inside the compound. But over the roar of the tank assault, it is difficult to hear anything. The ceiling of the vault begins to give way on the women and children inside. In the chaos, Graham Craddock thinks he sees another follower pouring fuel.
And there was a guy, he looked like he was pouring something out of a fuel can onto the floor. I heard this scream out from one of the other guys, wait, not inside, do it outside. few minutes later, I heard a call from upstairs saying the building's on fire.
To authorities, it's clear the blaze has been started deliberately by the Davidians.
There is no doubt in my mind that the Branch Davidians struck the individual matches that set that compound on fire.
But the Davidians tell a different story.
I never believed that any of the Davidians started the fire. I mean, I never saw anyone pouring any kind of accelerant or anything like that.
I don't think that they killed themselves. And the reason I say this is because the women and children were supposed to live on, particularly the children. There was nothing in the message about the children being killed for any reason.
With Mount Carmel in flames, Koresh and the Davidians either have to flee or be burned alive. Throughout the siege, by way of FBI negotiations, some Davidians have been allowed to leave the compound. One of those is Sheila Martin, who watches on with horror while the rest of her family is still trapped inside.
My thought was, where is everyone? And I could see places on the building where there was no flames, no smoke. I kept hearing that's where they were.
The wall to my right caught fire when it didn't singe the side of my face, and I could hear some hair crackling.
The worst fears of the FBI are being realized.
As soon as we saw the smoke, my instructions became a request. And as that fire built, the request became a plea. David, don't do this.
And the roar of the fire, once it started cooking off, I mean, it was loud. It was like a train coming down the track at you.
But so strong is Koresh's hold on his flock that his followers are fearful of leaving. A few years earlier, Koresh was able to tighten his grip on his followers by bringing in tough and controversial new edicts.
People have asked me what it was all about for David. Was it money? Was it love? Was it power? I believe it was power. It was about a man who wanted a group of people to obey him.
At Mount Carmel, David had strict rules regarding discipline.
When children misbehaved, they were paddled with a little wooden stick. David used it sometimes himself. When adults misbehaved, they were scolded or denied certain privileges.
I have memories that I'm not proud of. I actually started disciplining my older son closer to 6 months. And I remember spanking him once and looking at the paddle, and it had his blood on it. And if there is one thing I regret, it's that moment.
Most drastic of all was Koresh's new vision for himself.
He basically taught that he was a Christ, but with our afflictions, with our weaknesses.
Whereas Jesus had lived free of sin, Koresh, as the new prophet, embraced sin. He referred to himself as the sinful Messiah. In what he called the new light, Koresh taught that as the one closest to God, he was the only one worthy of fathering children.
The men and women who were married at Mount Carmel, or who thought of themselves as husband and wife, were no longer husband and wife. Everyone was married to Christ, whose word or spokesman was David Koresh.
Under the revelation of the new light, men were expected to practice celibacy, and even masturbation was outlawed. While for Koresh, who had a taste for young girls, followers as young as 14 were his for the taking.
And the fact that it might be illegal in certain states or in this country or whatever was not an issue if he figured he was being obedient to God.
It sounds insane. It would be insane to most people, where Koresh has babies, as many babies as possible for the kingdom of God, and he gets all the women.
I realized I was being called to do something. for God. And that if I did this, I could open my Bible and see it right there and go, this is what I'm doing. This is my part in the story.
Koresh had finally gained the power he had lacked as a bullied child. Mr. Retardo was now running the show.
Who is worthy to open this book and to loose the seals thereof?
But with the continuing growth of his cult came the expense of running it.
David had to support about 120 people who cost him about $150 a month. He had to have an income.
This was when Koresh turned to trading guns.
They would sell guns and other things. I remember they bought an army disposal store that was going out of business. They bought everything they had. It was meals ready to eat. There was, you know, military uniforms and boots, and they bought the whole stock.
The legal semi-automatics that Koresh and his people bought doubled in value during the years that Koresh was leading Mount Carmel.
Koresh's money-making venture was alarming to federal agents.
The thing that I think gave all of us pause was the fact that the entire focus of the Branch Davidian faith was centered on the concept of a major battle, the end of the world, the Battle of Armageddon, and the end times.
And now, for David Koresh and his followers, the end of the world is almost here. April 19th, 1993, 12:20 p.m. After a 51-day siege in Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidian compound is a blazing inferno. Over their PA system, the FBI pleads with Koresh and the others to come out. As the building burns to the ground, those still alive have run out of options.
I said, well, I'd rather be shot than burned to death. And I really had the feeling, upon exiting the building, that I was going to be shot.
And I kind of stumbled over all of this 2x4s and sheetrock and come out the hole. I remember when I came out, my jacket was all melting and skin was just rolling off my hand.
In all, only 9 Davidians make it out alive. Reaching the survivors, FBI agents drill them about the location of the cult's children.
He's screaming at me, "Where are the kids? Where are the kids?" I says, "I don't know." I said, "I haven't seen any of the kids."
None of the 9 survivors are children. And there's no sign of Koresh.
My greatest fear was that he would have a secret David Koresh tunnel, and that the building would be hot. It would take a day or two to cool off. And then after 3 days, David Koresh would pop up out of a spider hole. 3 days, Christ has been resurrected. And that every religious wacko nut in the world would make their way to Waco, the new Mecca, and would be there to worship David Koresh, the risen Savior.
But for the self-appointed savior, his time on earth has run out. Three days later, forensic investigators discover 33-year-old David Koresh's body in the charred ruins. In his forehead, they find a single gunshot wound. The autopsy suggests that David Koresh was killed at close range. Either he pulled the trigger or he was shot by one of his followers.
I think he was a manipulative, functional, psychotic, a sociopath. I think he took terrible advantage of the Branch Davidians. I think those people died because of his failed leadership.
In all, 74 people die at Mount Carmel. 21 of those are children, all under the age of 12. 3/4 of those are David Koresh's own children. Despite the carnage, some still keep faith in their Texan Messiah.
I believe David will be resurrected, and I'm going to see my grandchildren again.
I believe that, in a sense, God was willing to sacrifice this group of people for a greater cause.
But others see Koresh in a different light.
David's biggest failure was the fact that the kids were not released during the siege at some point. That's the unforgivable thing, is that these kids never had a chance.
The FBI was also left to account for its own failures. It had tragically misread the cult and made a series of disastrous tactical mistakes.
We grossly underestimated the extent of control that David Koresh held over all of those people.
I think the federal government failed. I think Koresh's master plan was carried out by David Koresh, and I think we, FBI, ATF, other agencies, I think we facilitated that master plan. We didn't nail him on the cross, we burned him to the ground.